This video is part of the Introduction to Philosophy and is part one of a midterm exam review. Hello. We're going to go over the questions in this video from the first set. I've already got up here the question A. Remember, from the first set of questions, you can choose one of these questions to answer, only one from the first set. And the first set has 4 questions. So we'll be doing A, B, C, and D in this video. All right, let's look at question A. When William James begins to write about metaphysics, he states that he could present a definition of metaphysics, but he backs away from defining metaphysics when he claims any definition would be incomplete. Instead, James introduces metaphysics by setting out a list of actual metaphysical questions. We are given 2 methods of introducing metaphysics: by definition and by example questions. James argues that there are 2 tendencies in philosophy: rationalism and empiricism. Which method is rationalistic and which one is empirical? Explain why. Okay, so this question comes straight from chapter 2. Chapter 2 is where William James writes, and this is in some problems of philosophy. That's where he starts talking about metaphysics. And in some ways, it's a repeat of chapter 1, because what happens in chapter 1, he says the German textbook starts with the definition. And this is not going to be a German textbook, he says, so I'm not going to start that way. Then he starts talking about definitions, but it's a part of a whole project in chapter 1, which is an argument, right? We get an argument for why we should study philosophy. And his reasons are pragmatic, right? He's telling us why we should study it because of what it can do for us. All right, but now we get to chapter 2. He's going to talk about metaphysics, and he's back to the same problem. Do I start with the definition, or now he says, do I give examples? He doesn't really do what he did in chapter 1, where he says, well, let's see why metaphysics will be useful to you. Perhaps this is a harder argument to make, but maybe not. All right, so metaphysics, he ends up giving us actually ends up giving us kind of both. But he explains why the definition he doesn't think is going to help us much, because it's trying to capture so much in such a broad field that it becomes meaningless. And that it also is just hard to write a definition that is so broad. So he gives us a bunch of example questions. And either way, though, it's kind of overwhelming, right? But we can, in this question, what we're going to try to do is connect up these 2 different methods of introducing, of learning something, right? This is connected to epistemology, right? So we're in question A, and we're dealing a lot here with epistemology, which is, in a nutshell, if we're going to define it, sort of the philosophical study of knowledge, how we know things, how we learn about them. Okay, so we know that we have 2 methods: by definition and then by example. And these are our 2 methods for introducing and learning something. Okay. And we want to connect these to what William James calls 2 tendencies in philosophy. So 2 tendencies in philosophy, which are rationalism and empiricism. Okay, so we need to know what rationalism is in this question. We need to know what empiricism is to be able to answer this question. At the end of chapter 2, we get a lot of details from William James where he tries to say, here's one, here's the other. We created a chart in class. Rationalism on one side, empiricism on the other. And so what you need to do is you need to go back and review that, maybe review the chapter to really understand what these two tendencies are in philosophy. And I will say that William James calls these tendencies. Traditionally, they're different philosophical positions in epistemology. Right? So William James is trying to take these two parts of epistemology and expand on them, take them out of just epistemology to just this idea of a standpoint, of a way of looking at life as an attitude, personality. So remember, rationalism, he says, starts with the whole and then goes to the parts. William James says empiricism is the exact opposite of that. It starts with the parts and then tries to go to the whole. And when the movement from the whole to parts or from the parts to the whole, we say are different types of reasoning. So if you're going to go from a whole to a part, we call that deduction. Right? That's the kind of thinking, the thought process, where you take something larger and then you conclude something smaller but included within the larger whole. On the other hand, empiricism, that starts with the part and then goes to the whole. The form of reasoning we said was called induction. Right? You take a bunch of parts, you look for a pattern, you assume that this is true for any part, and therefore it's true for the whole. We call that induction, and that's a practice that's used in science. Okay, so rationalism, empiricism, talk a little bit about how we're introduced to those. You should already have a good idea of how these might map up. Right? A definition defines any instance of something is going to be captured in the definition of it, right? Because the definition sort of lays out the essence of something. This is what it is. And then you can go and find specific examples of it. Right? So you'd start with the definition of that covers everything, and then you look for specific examples. On the other hand, right, empiricism, we said, starts with the parts. And when we get all those questions, right, example questions, and we read them, and we think, okay, here's what's it asking? How might I answer this? Do I have an answer to this? You're having a little experience of metaphysics, and we see this big diversity of questions. And the idea here is that, as you see all these different questions, and you see what kind of questions they are, you can begin to talk about that. You can use induction to speak in general terms about all these different parts, what patterns you might see that connects them together. And so you would use induction to speak about the whole of metaphysics. Okay, I've given you a lot here. You obviously can't just copy what I've said, but hopefully this will set you on the right path to sort of break down this question and compose and articulate your own answer. All right, so fortunately, we have some little interludes today, and it's a good thing that in the past a lot of commercials were not copyrighted, because that means they're now in the public domain. So we're going to take a little break, commercial break, and we'll be right back in a moment with question B.
Getting a new hat for the luncheon, Helen?
What luncheon?
Why, Thelma, don't tell me you've forgotten.
Forgotten? I wasn't even invited. Why, I haven't been invited anywhere for weeks. What's wrong with me anyway?
What's wrong, Helen? Maybe it's your breath. But new Green Mint mouthwash stops oral bad breath 3 ways better than antiseptics. 1, destroys mouth odor itself, even from onions, smoking, telltale beverages, not just germs. Because Green Mint contains exclusive chloroquet plus a new mouth sweetener. 2, even mixed with water, Green Mint has 37% more penetrating power. 3, tastes so good, leaves no antiseptic smell. Yes, with Green Mint, there's always a happy ending. Your mouth tastes so minty fresh, you know your breath is safe. Used professionally by over 10,000 dentists, Green Mint stops oral bad breath 3 ways better.
Thank you, Helen. Perhaps you haven't seen anyone in 3 weeks because you're practicing social distancing while you're quarantined at home by yourself. But just because you're all by yourself doesn't mean you should not still be using your mouthwash. You don't want your webcam or your mic to start to stink. Okay, question B. Let's take a look at that. Sorry, I have to organize. So question B. We are now going to reflect upon for a moment. All right, so let's read it. Senator Marco Rubio argued that one should study welding, not philosophy. In Chapter 1 of Some Problems of Philosophy, an American Introduction to Philosophy, right? This is his American introduction, and it's going to be different than, at that time, the dominant textbook, which is German. Okay, so William James gives us many counter-arguments to Rubio. Pick your favorite 3 and use them to compose an argument against Rubio. Okay, so Marco Rubio, we all know when he was running in the Republican primary in 2016, for the 2016 election, he made quite a few comments where he attacked philosophy, and we sort of have a couple of different premises that he used to support his argument. One of them was kind of a selfish reason, right? Because you can earn more money, he says, welding. Now, this particular part of the argument was one we said was people fought back against. Do welders really make more money than philosophers? If you look at some data for a philosopher later in their career, they might make more than welders, but certainly the field is more complex than that, and there's a lot of us who are working as adjuncts, and we do not make more than welders. So that part of the argument is pretty complex. The other side is less selfish, more about what's best for society as a whole. And there, we said, well, maybe he's on stronger grounds, that philosophy is not going to address things that are really important that we need right now for society as a whole, such as infrastructure, and that being a welder means you could help rebuild our bridges, rebuild buildings that are falling apart, rebuild transportation infrastructure, that there's a lot that this nation needs. Okay, so that could be Marco Rubio's argument against philosophy, and we know that a few years after that he actually changes his mind, but let's just look at his original argument. Okay, so William James is going to be the counter argument to Rubio, and that whole first chapter is really one long counter argument to those that are critics of philosophy, right? That first chapter is named Philosophy and Its Critics. Okay, so you just have to pick your favorite 3 that William James presents to us and say, here's part of the argument for why you should study philosophy. What is one of my favorites? It would have to be the social reason, that you will have a better social life if you study philosophy, right? You'll become more attractive to other people, particularly as a conversation partner. And why was that? Well, that was because William James says philosophy is about learning different ways of viewing the world, different perspectives, different attitudes. And that means that you, in a conversation, are able to see the other person's side more easily, and you're also not just repeating yourself over and over again. You're able to articulate and talk about different ways of looking at something, and that makes you more interesting. You're not a broken record. So the social reason, right? We become more interesting as conversation partners after we have spent some time studying philosophy. Okay, so there's lots of other reasons, and you just need to pick 3 reasons, 3 parts of William James's argument, right? 3 premises that he uses to support his argument for why we should study philosophy. Okay. Well, that was pretty quick, but I think this question is pretty straightforward. But we're just in time for another commercial break.
It's time to wake. Tang, the happy new breakfast drink you don't squeeze, unfreeze, or refrigerate. Yet it gives your family more of the vitamin C everyone needs every day. In fact, Tang gives you more vitamin C than the finest orange juice, fresh or frozen. More vitamin A, too. And Tang is so much easier to fix. Watch. Ice cold water in a juice glass, plus 1 rounded tablespoon of Tang. Stir, and instantly you have delicious Tang. Everyone loves its sunny, wide-awake flavor. Tang tastes fresh because you make it fresh each morning. You get more flavor, plus more vitamin C and A than even the freshest orange juice. Look for the jar with the orange-colored cap at your grocer's now. And every morning, wake up to Tang.
T-A-N-G.
Okay, well, we've got to make sure we're feeding ourselves properly while we're all stuck at home. One option is Tang. Also, apologize, I'm still learning how to do everything. I just noticed that the audio was kind of a little bit overpowering on that video, and it almost seemed like there was a hiccup when it was playing. I don't know what was going on there. I will say that I will blame that on Tang, such a powerful commercial that it actually caused a little hiccup there. All right, so question C. So, move on to question C. And what was question C? Question C. At points in the course, we have been thinking about racism and slavery. Paradoxically, America was founded upon both freedom, right, land of the free, and slavery. Right, it was legal. How does the theory of pragmatism give us a way to look beyond race? At the same time, how is pragmatism a condition that can lead to the practice of slavery? So this question is saying pragmatism cuts both ways, right? It could either be a way to path of liberation, or a path back to enslavement? So we have to think about how that might be the case. And I think this is one of the harder questions, because it's asking you to go a little bit beyond what we discussed in class and really try to apply the different theories. Well, this theory of pragmatism. Okay, so let's think about how pragmatism can be a theory of liberation. Theory of liberation. All right, well, what did we say pragmatism was? Well, it's about whether things work, right? What something can do. And that's how everything is judged. Everything is judged by the difference it makes, what it is able to accomplish, what it can do. Right? And that applies not just to ideas, but to anything we encounter. So you would judge a hammer by how well it does whatever you're trying to do with it. If you're trying to hammer nails, if it's got enough weight on it that you can still lift it, but it will pound the nail into the wood, then it's a good hammer. If it's really lightweight and every time you try to bang it down, it just doesn't have the momentum to carry through and put the nail into the wood, then it's a bad hammer. So everything is judged by how well it works, and everything is seen as a tool. So this could be the same. We can apply this thinking in terms of how well things work to people. Right? We don't judge people by any other sort of category other than the difference they can make. It's very sort of instrumental, and it means that when William James was looking at his students to see who he would take on as new students, he wasn't looking at the color of their skin, right? Or where they came from, or their past. He looked at what they were capable of doing. Right? So if you're just judged based on what you can do, you might call this merit, then you're not looking at all these other things that were used as either blatant or hidden forms of racism to keep people out of different practices or institutions. So pragmatism is a way of no longer judging people by their heritage, by their religion, by the color of their skin. Instead, you judge people by what they can do, what they're capable of. And this was seen as a way to get beyond racism and the racism that was tied into the practice of slavery. Okay, so theory of liberation is about how we judge people, not by their skin, but by what they can do. All right, let's look at the next thing. Same theory, pragmatism, but now the theory of enslavement. I'm not totally happy with that word here, but okay. Question mark. How's that possible? Well, we just talked about how it can cut towards liberation. How does it cut towards enslavement? We have to go back and think about what it is about. Right? Remember I said before that everything is seen as a tool. And that means that people are tools, and not just tools also, but that's what they are tools. And slavery is about just using another person as a tool to serve you, your family. So the mindset that needs to be in place for something like slavery to become widely accepted is that people have to be seen just as mere tools, and that's where you lose the humanity. That they're not just a tool, that there's a person there. There's a human person. So the instrumental nature becomes tantamount to everything. And people just become tools to be used. Okay, so interesting. I think this is really fascinating how pragmatism can go in either direction. Okay, well, we're at that point again where we have a third commercial break.
How do you top the great taste of fresh strawberries? Easily, with the country fresh flavor of Dream Whip dessert topping. It's a natural on strawberry shortcake, or on a whole bowl full of strawberries, or on a fruit festival, because Dream Whip is rich and delicious, and it never wilts or separates. Makes fresh fruit taste even better. Try it. Dream Whip dessert topping with country fresh flavor.
Dream Whip. Hope you guys are treating yourself well, as best you can, while we're all quarantined. Okay, so now we're on question D. This is going to be the last question from this first set of questions. Remember, if you so choose to choose one of the questions from this first set, you can only do one of them. So, what is question D? Let's read it. William James distinguishes between dogmatic and philosophic education. Define both kinds of education and give an example of each one. Which one does G.W. Foote argue against? In answering this question, explain G.W. Foote's argument for questioning our beliefs. Okay, G.W. Foote was someone that we talked about actually on the first day of class. So this is going way, way back. But it's exactly connects up with William James's distinction here, right, between dogmatic and philosophic education. So there's a bunch of parts to this question. You need to know what the difference is between dogmatic and philosophic. This is education. So let's talk for a second about that. Dogmatic education. Right? You are told the truth. It is not something. It is not something to be questioned. It is something to be memorized, right? Just internalized. This is what something is. This is how you do something. This is dogmatic education. Here's the definitions of these words. If you don't know what the definition is and you just come up with your own definition of this word, no one will know what you are saying, because we all use this other definition that was taught to us dogmatically. Philosophic education. Here, right, we're using William James's new definition of philosophy, that it's a discipline where we learn about different ways to look at the world, different standpoints, different perspectives on the world. So here we're not being told which one is the right one. Right? We're given the opportunity to explore different perspectives. So it's an education of exploration and an understanding of different ways of looking at the world. Okay, so there is a lot of questioning here. There is no one truth, at least when we are learning about different perspectives. Let's say philosophical perspectives, but it carries into any type of learning where you are not just told this is how you do it, but you learn lots of different ways. And actually, something as simple as math, right, where you think that would be dogmatic. 5 + 5 = 10, this is how you do it. And for a long time, it was taught dogmatically, but now it's actually taught more philosophically, where students learn all different strategies of how to do any given problem. And then they're not told which one is the best strategy. You should learn different ways to do things. That's a much more philosophic way of teaching mathematics. Okay, so we have these two different ways of educating, philosophic and dogmatic. The question asks you to both define what sort of we started to do here, but also to give an example of each one, and you can go back in your own life and say, okay, this is a period where when I was taught something, it was more philosophic. We explored the topic. I learned different ways of doing it. There was perhaps no one right way. Universal, maybe for me, there's a way I like better, but universally there was no one right way. And also dogmatically. G.W. Foote, right, this is the next part of the question, says that most of your childhood, a lot of it is dogmatic. You just download the beliefs of your parents and your culture and the religion that you happen to have been born into. All these things kind of just get downloaded, and we don't really question them. As young children, we're just not in a position where we even know how to question anything. And so we just assume this is what something is. This is how the world is. So G.W. Foote thinks that the beginning of our life is dogmatic, or at least to a large degree, is dogmatic education. But then he says that at some point you start to mature, you grow, you develop the power to reason. He says we're all sort of lucky to have been born with this ability, and if we have that ability, and it takes a while for it to really develop. It's not until late in high school and when you get into college that you really have reached the level of maturity where you can really sort of use this faculty. And so Foote says shouldn't we use it? And shouldn't we use it to go back and look at all these beliefs we have that we just sort of absorbed and come up with reasons? Let's see if we have reasons for why we hold these beliefs. And the idea is that by going through this process of questioning our beliefs so that we can have reasons to support them, that we'll be in a stronger position. Right? That a belief held with reasons for it is stronger than one that we hold without reasons. This is what he's arguing. And that once we have reasons for why we hold a belief, then we can share those reasons with other people. We can participate in dialogues and debates and try to logically persuade others using reason. Okay, so which one does G.W. Foote argue against? Well, at a certain point, he's going to argue against one of those because he thinks that we need to have reasons to support our beliefs. And so the last part of this is about questioning your beliefs, and that you need to do that in order to look for support, reasons why you believe something. If you don't question a belief, you have no motivation to find that evidence or whatever it is that you're going to use to support that belief. You have no reason to go find it if you're not questioning that belief. It's when it gets questioned that you say, okay, well, here's why I believe it, and then you figure out what those reasons are. Okay, so that's question D. That finishes up our first set of questions. There are 4 sets of questions, and you only have to do 3 questions total. So there's one whole set that you can just say, I'm not going to do any questions from that set. Okay. I will come back soon with part 2.